The second assumption we make that's inaccurate is sexual predators are monsters, and they're nothing like us. That's simply not true. Sexual predators do not fit a mold. They don't have a profile. I'm going to list several different professions. You tell me which one is most likely to be a child sexual offender. Architect, doctor, nurse, librarian, mom of four, mechanic, landscaper, pastor, teacher. Which one's most likely? All of them. All of them. None of them fit a profile. There's nothing that, some of them might have, we might be aware of some of them more than others just because they might have a higher stature, but all of us are subjected to it because we know that we're sinners. It's in our heart, and if it goes undealt with, it just leads to death, right? So these are literally wolves in sheep's clothing. They are fake Christians that are entering the church. That leads me to number 3. Another assumption we make, especially with a church this large, we know the people in our church. Quite frankly, that's just not true. Predators have learned where to infiltrate. They've learned, and this has been through several studies, interviews with convicted sex offenders, where the vulnerable areas of society are. So they infiltrate. They wear a mask. They come in buttoned up, dressed up. They look professional. They look clean. But too often, Christians are confusing likability with trustworthiness. They are not the same thing. Number 4, our church is safe for our kids. I will tell you, Church of 1122 is doing a pretty good job. They're putting great safety measures in place. They're working with us to raise the level of standard of care for their churches. But that is just not the case with the majority of churches. The majority of churches don't even require membership in order to serve children. Membership acts as a firewall, so that way you can get to know those people before you put them in contact with children. Okay. All right. So, 2 different types of predators. Can we go back to the predator slide? Perfect, thank you. Okay, 2 different types of predators. There's the persuasion predator, which we talked a little bit about. He uses his personality, his charm, his influence to gain trust. These are your wolves in sheep's clothing. Then we have the power predator. You hear about different kidnappings. Those are the power predators. They take by force. So we talked about the myth of stranger danger. We talked about the different professions of people that could potentially, as we know, is all of them. So what does grooming the child look like? So we learned there's a problem of abuse. We learned the different kinds of predators. We learned the false assumptions we make, but what do they do next, right? So now what they do is they find the church that doesn't have a membership program, that doesn't have a safety program. They are finding a low-wall church that they can easily infiltrate. The first thing they do is they gain trust of the entire church community. Sounds absolutely exhausting, but it's really not. When you only see someone once or twice a week, it's very easy to put on a different persona than who you actually are. So the first thing they do is they cultivate a double life, and once they're trusted by the majority of people, then they start asking to gain access to children. Once they've gained access to the children, if any kind of suspicions arise from accusations or anything like that, unfortunately, because we live in the culture we live in, statistics show only about 20% of people possess critical thinking. That means that the majority of the people are going to say, this guy's trustworthy. He looks a certain way, so he must be trustworthy. And if you start questioning that, it's almost as if it's not credible. So you have to be careful and try your best to possess critical thinking. If red flags go up, there's probably a chance. that person doesn't have good motives. If you see an adult or a teenager, an older teenager even, who wants to hang out more with children versus people their own age, that's a red flag. After they gain access to the church, they gain the trust of the church, then they start looking for a family. They look for a vulnerable family, whether it be from a broken home, a foster kid, a single mom, something of that nature, maybe a rebellious teenager even, someone who maybe, if they said something, might not be trusted. So they look for that family. Once they find the family, it's time to groom the actual child. So they have a hyper focus on the child, they start giving the child extra attention, they start giving the child gifts, extraordinary praise, and then slowly they start to test the child's silence. What does this look like? Let's just hypothetically say that a Sunday school teacher has a group of kids, and some of those kids didn't finish their Sunday school work. Or there's a small group and there was an assignment and some of the kids didn't do it. And so they're asked to stay behind. Well, at this point, this guy looks trustworthy. Not only the church, but the family trusts him. And so they say, no, not a big deal. Well, they'll slowly start to blur the lines of appropriate and inappropriate. What does that look like? They'll start touching the child on the back over the shirt. Child doesn't say anything. That's pretty normal, right? We hug each other, put our arms around each other's neck, stuff like that. That's pretty normal. So after he does that for a little bit, the next step is touch under the shirt on the back. If the kid says anything, the groomer has an excuse. Oh, I was just looking for chicken pox. He was complaining his back was hurting. I thought maybe he cut himself. If the parents raise that to the offender will then move on to the next kid. Why? Because that kid won't hold silence. That kid will tell his parents or her parents when somebody makes them feel uncomfortable. So it's vitally important if you have children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, whatever the case is, that you talk to them about how to talk to adults. Because they should be able to voice their concern if anybody ever makes them feel uncomfortable. Does anybody remember the Jerry Sandusky case? A little bit? He was a Penn State coach, very likable for decades. He was a foster dad. And when children started saying, hey, my foster dad is molesting me, nobody believed them because he was, an influential person in society. He had done such great work at Penn State. Nobody believed him. And so the majority of children will say, who's going to believe a kid? And so it's important that we talk to kids about these things so that way they can feel comfortable coming forward. 55% of molesters will covertly abuse a child in front of other children. What does that look like? Calling a child behind their desk in the classroom and fondling them from behind the desk. 24% of molesters are even more bold and will molest a child in front of another adult. So I challenge you all to be a little bit more observant of what's going on around you. In America, we tend to kind of stay in our own little bubble because it's comfortable, and I understand that. But this is a vitally important subject that we all have to be more aware of. There's 6 stages of grooming. The first one, finding the vulnerable target, church, and then the family. Gaining the trust, filling a need. So it's pretty safe to say that churches across the country usually are pretty desperate for child care workers, volunteers, and youth workers. Thankfully, you guys have been blessed. Very large church. Maybe that's not such a need here, but that's what they're looking for. They're looking to fill a need. So if they can put food on the table for a single mom, or they could pay a bill, whatever that case is, they're trying to fill that need. Then they start isolating the child or the teenager. They might take them, let's say there's a youth retreat. They might want to take that particular child to the youth retreat or take the child back home from the youth retreat. So you got to be careful with those things. After they start isolating the child, then they start desensitizing and sexualizing the child. What does that look like? Maybe they're aware of some abuse that has happened to that child in the past. They will actually relive that abuse with the child to further desensitize the child to that kind of abuse. They might put things on the television while they're isolated with the child that are very inappropriate, that children have no business watching, further desensitizing and sexualizing. Then they maintain control by continuing to fill that need.